Kia ora and welcome to another episode of Both Sides Now, hosted by Alex Martin
and Eve McCallum.
We are two 26-year-olds with an interest in politics and the ways that it shapes our lives. Every day we see how political decisions affect people and how people in turn affect politics. Our goal is to help bridge political divides by encouraging thoughtful conversations across different perspectives. Along the way, we'll explore the issues young people need to understand, highlight the stories that individuals are shaping our world, and inspire greater youth engagement in politics and public life. Whether you're politically active, politically curious, or just trying to make sense of what's happening around you, Both Sides Now is a place for open discussion, fresh perspectives, and meaningful debate.
For new listeners, I'm Eve. I am right-wing, which means I traditionally vote National, and I am a National Party member.
And I sit left of the political spectrum. My heart lies with the Greens, but I'm always open to new ideas.
And while we don't always agree on politics, we believe through some constructive conversation, there's a lot to find in common. One thing being that we're both young women, and we're interested in focusing on the experience of women and the impacts of politics on women's lives.
So that's a bit about us. Today, we're going to speak to three main topics. We're going to talk to the new stalking laws, the Smith and Fonterra court case and the discussion around that, and also polls. What are they? What does the most recent Roy Morgan one say? And should we be critical of them? So, first of all, Eve, welcome back. Another week. How are you going?
I'm well. Nice to see you again. It feels again like it's been another hectic week, although probably a little bit quieter on the political front because the House has been in recess week. And for those of you who don't know what recess week means, basically the House is a little bit like, I describe it a little bit like school. So they have weeks where the House sits, and so politicians are required to be in Wellington, and the House sits from a Tuesday to a Thursday. The House sits about 30 weeks a year. And the weeks it doesn't sit are called recess weeks, which is when politicians are out in their electorates, meeting with constituents and doing other things. So this week is a recess week. So you probably will have seen a little bit less of your politicians in your media, which is always nice to have a break from it. It felt like it had been a pretty full-on few weeks. So it's been probably a bit quiet on the political front. But yeah, how are you? What's been happening in your life?
Not a lot. Look, the new season of Love Island's just started. I don't know if I will be watching this year. I feel like I may have tipped over the edge of maybe too old for that. Who knows? I don't know. We'll see.
I feel like it's going out of fashion a little bit, though, right? Like the reality TV programs are becoming more problematic. We're seeing stuff coming out of maths in Australia.
100%. And you know what? I didn't watch Married at First Sight Australia this year, mainly because I couldn't commit the time to it.
And as a time suck. I tried to and it didn't succeed.
And it is just getting more awful and awful. Like I'm a sucker for reality TV, that sort of escapism of it all, but too much negativity. So yeah, I don't know, trying to find, big into the books at the moment.
That's
Been doing
good.
some reading, trying to refind my love for reading after reading to death after university and in work for, business and work purposes. So nice to find some books. So I don't know, just kind of been cruising along. Nice to have a bit of a quieter week this week, especially after the budget release too. So I haven't been scrolling the news and social media as much.
Yeah, but it's still been a bit happening internationally. You might have seen that 4 New Zealand MPs went to Taiwan, and China have kicked off about that, and they've now been banned from going to China for a year. So I'm going to be interested to see how that plays out and sort of what diplomatic relations New Zealand does about that.
Yeah, because I think it's been pretty vocal pretty quickly that New Zealand's not very happy at that decision, and I think for good reason. And interestingly, it's across the political spectrum. All of the 4 MPs that visited from ACT, Labour, National, and New Zealand,
New Zealand First Greens, yeah. So yeah, it will be interesting. I think though New Zealanders are careful with China because we rely on them so much economically, and they have in a lot of perspectives done a lot for New Zealand. I don't think our country would have progressed the way it has without China, but obviously, diplomatic relations will be interesting. So probably watch the space on that one.
Yeah, delicate conversations.
100%. But probably something a little closer to home is the stalking legislation that's just been passed. Alex, do you want to give us a brief explainer on that?
Yeah, so long overdue. Let's get that out in front first, right? So the government has introduced and it's now in effect, the new stalking and harassment offence to ensure the harm that victims experience is recognised and prosecuted effectively. So it introduces a new crime into the Crimes Act, to address stalking and harassment as an offence with a maximum penalty of 5 years imprisonment. So previously, some stalking behaviours were already illegal. Prosecutors would be able to argue that some behaviours qualified as stalking under the Harmful Digital Communications Act and the Harassment Act. But stalking itself wasn't specifically defined under the Crimes Act. And this is something that really disproportionately affects women. Don't get it twisted. Anybody can be a victim of stalking and harassment, but women are greatly overrepresented in these statistics, especially Māori, Pacifica, disabled and queer women as well. So the stalking definition, I guess to kind of get a little bit into the nitty-gritty of it, the Act creates this definition of a person, person A, stalks and harasses another person, person B, if person A engages in a pattern of behaviour that is directed at person B or doing any specified act to person B on at least 2 separate occasions within a period of 2 years, and engages in a pattern of behaviour knowing that it is likely to cause fear or distress to person B. And that first part, by doing any specified act to person B, has also been defined and has got this sort of list of defining it as watching, following, loitering, recording, tracking, contacting, communicating. But I think what I found quite important from that is that at the end of that it has a sort of catch-all phrase of acting in any way that would cause fear or distress to a reasonable person. So I think it's sufficiently wide to be able to address the issue of stalking in New Zealand.
Yeah, and as you said, it's long overdue. I think I've recently started, haven't finished yet, watching Jazz Thornton's documentary on stalking.
I haven't started.
I've only seen the first episode, but it is so well done. And I just really want to commend her and the other 2 people in the show as well for the work that they've done. Not easy at all to share your story and to go and work with government to try and change the law. And also, while we're working across the aisle here, commend Tamitha Paul, because she's also done quite a lot of work on this as well. She had a members bill in. So I think this is one of those pieces of legislation that everyone in government can agree is something that needed to happen, and it's crazy that it hadn't happened sooner. So yeah, really well done, and hopefully this will kind of put a stop to it. I read recently that the police have already caught one person under this piece of legislation.
Gonna ask you, so the amendment came into force on May 26. Do you know when the first charge was laid?
Was it May 26th or May 27th?
May 27.
Yeah, it was literally straight away. So that shows that it happens all the time, right? And there'd be so many women out there. Like I knew of a girl from university who had a stalker as well, and there was just nothing that could be done about it. So I think it's brilliant. It's well overdue. So well done to the government, and as I said, well done to Tamitha Paul as well, and everyone has come forward with their stories to help get the government to progress on this.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess for a more sort of like Gen Z lens on things, doing a little bit of research, according to UN Women in their 2024 report on ending violence against women and girls, the available data shows that younger women, so like Gen Z and millennials, those born between say like 1981 and 2012, are the most affected with technology facilitated violence. And so like that's the thing, like the law needs to be able to keep up with what's happening on the internet and how people are evolving their habits to be able to be harmful and be violent against women in particular, by the ways of stalking and harassment.
Well, if you think about the Jazz Thornton documentary, she was talking about how like her stalker was based in the Netherlands, and he followed her on social media. She's got a massive social media following. She does a brilliant job with the mental health advocacy work she does. But he managed to track down not just obviously the country she lived in, but the city, the suburb, and then where her house was, and then messaged her to say that he was outside her house. So the ability of what people can find online now,
it makes me sick.
Crazy.
It actually makes me like my tummy flip. It's just so disturbing.
And the fact that there was like when she called the police went up and they're like, well, there's really nothing we can do about it. This person had flown all the way across the world to do God only knows what to her. So I think that's a perfect example of how times are changing. There's way more information available, so it's now much easier to stalk somebody because there's just so much available online. And yes, I know there's the argument that we should be careful what we put online, put less online. Sure, but you've also got to like ground it in reality. And the reality is that everyone does put a lot online. And I think that you can't go and victim blame and say, don't post so much online, particularly because Jazz does a lot of really important work in the mental health space. So we wouldn't want her to suddenly stop doing that. because of someone like him who decided to come around and terrify her.
Well, Jazz is somebody who's been really vocal about her struggles and has really opened up a conversation, opened up dialogue online through online media to speak about issues like suicide and now stalking that really affect people. And these issues shouldn't be something that people just keep taboo and close up and don't post online for fear of being stalked as a result. So, yeah.
100%. So I think, it's fantastic that we've actually made progress in this. And this is one of those kind of feel-good moments. I think there's a lot of stuff that goes on in Parliament, and, I'm sure, our listeners will have seen, if you've seen any of the news, or like, if you've ever, I'm sure you haven't, but if you watched Parliament TV, it's pretty, I don't know, it's hard to think. You can kind of feel like, oh my God, these people are meant to be making our laws and running this country, what's going on? So I think the stalking stuff's really nice because it's something that a lot of people can relate to, and it's a good positive change to come out of government.
I agree. There have been some criticisms of it. Obviously, I think being quite celebratory of the law, the fact that it is what it is now, it's actually been made a crime, huge, not to detract from that in any way or means. But just speaking to Leonie Morris of Auckland Women's Centre, she's the project lead for Aotearoa Free from Stalking. And so, as I said, while she celebrates this law change, it's something that she's long advocated for. She says that there's actually a lot that is yet to be seen in the support for stalking victims and the sort of like fit for purpose safety and services for people who are the victims of stalking. So it'd be interesting to see how the law works in practice. And what is kind of gutting, I think, is that there have been a few cuts made to some of the services, such as Respected, which is one of New Zealand's few specialist sexual violence prevention organisations, which says that it will be forced to close in August unless the government steps in. In 2024, there was a funding cut for Kia Haumaru, which is Aotearoa's personal safety education network, which means that its future is more uncertain. They're no longer able to pay staff, and they're providing fewer free services and courses in schools. So yeah, while I don't want to detract from this wonderful law change, there is more to go in that space.
Yeah, and what I hope will happen is, I guess, kind of what we see develop with other organisations as new laws come into place. You look at, like, for example, the amazing work the Women's Refuge does for women that have been victims of domestic violence. I hope that we kind of, whether it's a spin-off of Women's Refuge or something a lot like, or a whole new organisation, but I do hope that we get some sort of support services opened up so that people who have been victims can help move on with their lives, because it's a pretty terrifying thing to have happen.
So terrifying. I remember one time in my sort of like year 13, I had an ex-partner of my ex-boyfriend who was harassing me online and posting a whole bunch of Instagram posts and stuff about me, huge walls of text messages to me, and it got to the point, like, I was pretty resilient about it. I thought it was a bit of a laugh, like, it's whatever, just a sort of jealous ex-partner or whatever. But it got to a point where, like, the wear and tear for me was just out the gate, and I found myself crying in the dean's room at school. That was escalated to the police, and I think I ended up getting the police sorted it out. I think what I was told is a harassment order was issued against this person, and after that police intervention it did simmer down. But like, I was so scared. Every morning I'd wake up and see what new was posted about me, walking around in town scared to bump into her or confront her or whatever, and that's something I think quite big for somebody at the age of 17 and 18 needs to deal with. So yeah, while I don't think I was a victim of stalking or anything, definitely that harassment aspect I can relate to, and the fear that you have when somebody is harassing you online.
Well, that, even though you wake up and it's not true, it's like, well, it still gets to you at some point.
Exactly.
Like, it's that constant barrage of just continuing to come at you for stuff, and it's just like, what's going on here? But that's a great example of how the police were able to step in and actually help.
Yeah.
And that there were laws in place that were able to help with that.
Yeah. So hopefully we have more good news stories kind of like that too.
Speaking of news stories that are probably not so good, and this is probably, I guess, in a flip side of an example of, I guess, because there's obviously a lot of lobbying, which we'll, I guess, explain in a second, done in the case of the stalking by people like Jazz Thornton. there's been a lot of lobbying done in the case of Smith v Fonterra. So I'm sure you might have seen in the news, there have been a heap of media stories about this case called Smith v Fonterra. So what it was is Mr. Smith was taking Fonterra, Z Energy, and a whole of the biggest polluters in New Zealand to court. And he had brought under a claim in tort law. So tort law, for our listeners who aren't lawyers, which I'm sure many of you aren't.
I, just for the record, did go to law school for 5 years. Still kind of confused as to what a tort might be, but carry on.
Torts are essentially just a wrong that is done to someone. And these torts don't exist in statute. So it's what we call judge-made law. And so it kind of allows the law to evolve with the courts as it kind of needs to as society evolves. And it kind of can evolve a bit faster than to wait for an act of parliament to pass. So Mr. Smith filed a court case quite a few years ago now against Fonterra and a number of other big polluters, basically trying to take them to court to say, you have been polluting and it's caused a nuisance to me and my land, and wanted a whole lot of damages from them. And also potentially an injunction as well to stop them doing it. Now, this case, what you've heard in the media about, it wasn't even the actual trial. So what happened was it initially went to the High Court, and the defendants, so Fonterra, Z Energy, etc., filed a strikeout application. And a strikeout application basically just means that this case has got no merit and we're not even going to proceed through a summary judgment or a proper judgment to defend this because it's just got no merit and there's no basis to hear it. That went all the way to the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in New Zealand. So you've got High Court, Court of Appeal, Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court actually said, no, we're going to not allow the strikeout application. We're going to deny it and we're going to put this through to a proper hearing. So the judgment that came out a couple of years ago, 2024, wasn't actually a substantive judgment on whether or not Fonterra and Z Energy were going to ever be liable on this tort. It just said that we actually think there's a potential case to hear here, so we're going to let it go to trial. So this matter was set down for trial in May 2027, and it was set down for a 12-week trial in the High Court, which is a massive trial.
Huge.
However, note that this judgment came out in 2024. But what Parliament have done now is they have legislated over the court decision, which Parliament are allowed to do. Parliament is supreme, and which one of our law school lecturers used to always love to say, Parliament is supreme. So I guess think of Parliament as the highest court in the land. Or if you want a comparison, if you think in America, their constitution is supreme, which means that nothing can override the constitution, which is why you see they can't change any of the gun laws, for example. But in New Zealand, Parliament is supreme, meaning that basically Parliament, within the reason, but can kind of do whatever it wants with it if you've got who's ever in government has a majority. So Parliament basically announced they're going to pass a law to say that you can never bring claims in climate change tort in New Zealand. The bill is actually, it's very short. I think it's like 6 or 7 sections. It's tiny. And so I guess there are a couple of problems with this. Is one, it's legislating over a court that has, in the middle of a court case, legislating over it, which is entitled to do. But I think I have a bit of a problem with the fact that they did it so late. I think they would have known at the time this potentially was going to be problematic. So they could have legislated over it much earlier. And I think the other thing as well that you might have seen is the lobbying that's going on around it. Now, lobbying is basically when people or businesses or organisations go to government and try and convince them that the government should change a law or do something that will benefit them. And lobbying happens all across Parliament. Greenpeace lobbied. I think they lobbied quite a lot for the ban on oil and gas in Taranaki. As I said, there would have been lobbying going on the stalking legislation, and there's been lobbying going on in the Smith v Fonterra case. Lobbying in and of itself, I don't have an issue with. I think it's completely fine and it's expected that it would happen. But I think the problem has been there's been a bit of it's been a bit murky and it hasn't been transparent. Because ultimately what's important is that if you're going to lobby, it's got to be transparent about it, so that so that regular people like us know who's in the politician's ear, because there can always be a bit of a misconception that the rich and powerful have all this ability, they can donate to political parties and they can then go and get what they want. Fonterra, to the best of my knowledge, don't donate to political parties, but they have gone and done a lot of work to try and get this piece of legislation and to override the court decision because of the fact that it would potentially have massive economic effects on them and on New Zealand, which is a perfectly legitimate argument. The problem is that there has been some material that Fonterra gave to the government in the course of lobbying that hasn't been necessarily received in the right place and it hasn't been transparent. So that's what's problematic about it. Not the fact that there was lobbying, that's normal and expected. It's the way they went about it and the sort of potential cover-ups, I think is where it's problematic. But what are your views on this? I mean, as someone who would have probably been more on the green ends and would love to have seen this case run.
Dude, I think this is outrageous. Can I just say that? I think this is outrageous. I mean, like, there are a few elements to this. First of all, let's speak quickly to the fact that that Parliament has decided that it's going to stop a court case from proceeding, and for any other future court cases from proceeding under these sorts of circumstances, which is essentially prohibiting people from bringing a tort law civil claim where we want to look at greenhouse gas emitters and say, you did that and we're going to seek damages, usually financial, from you. I kind of put it, you can put it to a comparison, say, with the Disability Support Services Bill, right, that we spoke to a couple of weeks ago. That was a situation in which it went through the courts, it got to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said that these family carers were employees of the Ministry of Social Development. Parliament saw the financial or fiscal risk to that and said, okay, the court's ruled this way, we're going to legislate over top of it. And as much as I disagree with that bill, that, I think, is the appropriate way to deal with things, because there's a dialogue between our branches of government, between the judiciary and between our legislature and our executive. The courts interpret and apply the law, and that the legislature and the executive makes. But how is this process able to be done when Parliament nips it in the bud, cuts it, completely undercuts it, chops it off at the legs? So a real issue for me in terms of the trust and confidence that we have in our institutions in that matter, that respect, but also a huge issue in the trust and confidence we have in our institutions when we find out, not through court disclosure, not through official information requests, but after the fact, after all of this is happening and the government has signalled that it's going to do essentially what the lobbyists have asked them to do in stopping these court claims from proceeding, by sending these lobbying materials, these briefings, to a chief advisor or senior advisor's private or personal email account. That's not transparent. And I will accept that Christopher Luxon has come out and said this is not good enough, because it isn't. But definitely I'm hearing the sort of opposition parties like Labour and Greens say, where there's smoke, there's fire. And even if there isn't anything else going on, the picture of it is still there for the public. And that's really concerning, because it erodes our trust and our confidence in these institutions.
Yeah, the eroding trust, I think, is my biggest issue with this, because I think we're living in a time, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate this, when you can just see all around the world that trust in government and government institutions is crumbling. And this sort of thing really doesn't help. I kind of think that, I was talking to someone about this morning, I think that people probably don't think they're hard about it, probably think, oh yeah, someone donates lots of money to a political party, they probably do a bit of lobbying and it probably happens. People probably don't know the extent to which it goes on, which I wouldn't expect anyone to. I know a lot of the stuff people lobby on is probably relatively uninteresting, and there's a lot of laws that get passed that just kind of that I guess kind of like very much just details, and I guess wouldn't affect a lot of everyday people's lives. But I think the problem with this is, it's just the fact that it went to a personal email address and it's just completely eroded trust, and it makes people go, okay, well, what else has gone on?
Yeah.
So I completely commend Christopher Luxon for coming out and saying this is not good enough. I suspect there's probably more to come out on this. And I think also probably, I think we should have, this was always going to be a contentious issue, because I think the government probably always going to legislate over this. I think that it potentially was going to be massive issues. And I think, and this will depend on what you view the role of the courts are. And I guess for our listeners, judiciaries in New Zealand, the role is to apply and interpret the law, but there's kind of an argument around how far that goes. And so if you look in America, because I guess something people often know about, the courts are very activist there because they have the Constitution is supreme, so it's the court's job to apply the Constitution.
Well, the courts in America can strike down law, whereas in New Zealand,
they can't.
Not quite.
But you get different judges who I guess will be, the terms used, more activist. And so I guess it depends on your view on the role of the courts as to whether or not you think that the court should be dealing with climate change. My personal view is no, it's very political. I read that Fonterra judgment that came out a couple of years ago. The first 20 or 30 pages talk about about the importance of climate change, what's happening with climate change, which in and of itself is political. So I personally think that it's the right decision, that it's for the government to deal with. I just think the way this is, I've got an issue with the process, not the decision.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be interesting to see what more comes out on this. And I think also because there are a lot of like very, very top New Zealand lawyers that are working on this case, probably not a good one for the government to have unfortunately stuffed up and Fonterra to have stuffed up.
Yeah.
Because they won't let it go. And, some very, very clever people who will keep digging and digging.
Yeah.
So probably I'd say watch this space.
I agree. Speaking quickly to climate change, I think there is also a pretty reasonable argument that the courts might not be the best place to deal with these sorts of issues. But I also think, in a more sort of broad sense of things, I think the law needs to evolve with climate change too. I think it's fair to see why advocates and activists have sort of resulted to pursuing these sorts of issues through the courts, through tort law, because our supreme lawmakers aren't doing a hell of a lot in that sort of space. In fact, they're doing the opposite, like this is just one bit in a sea, like one bit of context in a sea of anti-climate sort of policy. We've seen weakened methane targets, removing the requirement for our emissions trading scheme to be in accord with the Paris Agreement, the return of offshore fossil fuel exploration. And I mean, like, whatever your sort of view is on those sorts of issues, the vibe is that it's very anti-climate. So I think it's fair for people to get creative and use the processes available to them to explore. And that's the thing, just explore whether these issues should be dealt in this sorts of way. So, I don't know, a bit gutted, really.
And I think, as you say, I think, I think unfortunately, and I blame it on the coalition partners, but I think the government hasn't done a lot in the climate space. And as you say, this is just one of those kind of many things that sort of build up a picture that the government is anti-climate change. I don't think National is. I think they've just unfortunately got two coalition partners who are and don't believe in it. We'll just point out here, think very hard if you're a young person before voting for Active New Zealand First, because they do not care about those issues. It just is not, it's not a good picture. And I think, the issue is going to carry on, I think, for a little bit longer as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. And very quickly, you said before that you don't have an issue about the sort of lobbying laws and regulations, I guess, that we have at the moment. We know, for example, the Official Information Act, hopefully that's going to get a little bit of a refresh and things like that. Do you think we need a sort of anti-corruption, anti-corruption watchdog or anything?
That's interesting. And I guess for our listeners who don't know, the Official Information Act is basically a piece of legislation that allows the public to request pretty much any sort of government document. And there are reasons for withholding, such as, security, commercial sensitivity. There's a whole lot of sections, and I think reasons in Section 9 mainly. Very lame for those who've taken public law will know what I'm referring to. But the presumption basically is open government as opposed to closed government.
Yeah.
I'd like to say no, because I don't deep down believe New Zealand's corrupt. I think that, in the words of Wayne Eagleson, if anyone's listened to the episode, this is cock up over conspiracy. I don't think the government have intentionally been deceptive with this. But I think they need to be better about not getting themselves into trouble over this. I think that lobbying just needs to be transparent, and this example's not. I think lobbying is pretty transparent. I might be being naive there, so if anyone wants to call me out on that, go ahead. But, kind of what I see, I think a lot of it, as I said, if lobbying's done properly, you can Official Information Act, who ministers' diary meetings and all that sort of stuff. So you can, if you want to go through that process, it's a bit slow, but you can find the information out. So I think I'm going to say no at the moment, but watch the space.
Can I quote to you what former National Party Minister and now Transparency International New Zealand Chair Anne Tolley has said?
Oh, that's interesting.
We have seen the results over several parliamentary terms where industries and other interest groups with deep pockets, friends in high places, and easy access to power are unevenly influencing government policy, all without public visibility.
Interesting. I mean, she's been a minister, so she'll know probably what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, so maybe that sort of does lead into your point before, in that there might be more to see here. Not necessarily just with this specific issue, but maybe across the board.
Yeah. I hope not. I do deep down hope not, because I think it's really bad for our trust in the institution, which is why I'm really annoyed at the way this process happened. Because, there was always going to be a big kick up about this issue, and the government chose to legislate over an active court case.
Yeah.
So it is pretty disappointing that it's been such a mess.
Yeah. Let's do better, team.
100%.
Yeah. All right. Switching topics, shall we? Let's talk about the big poll that dropped this week.
Yes, this week.
So, the Roy Morgan poll. Roy Morgan is an independent Australian social and political market research, opinion, statistics company, would you say?
Yeah.
And it put out a poll this week, which has some very interesting results as to, I guess, say what the people that they surveyed, I assume it was a group of about 1,000 people, who they would vote for. And it also asked the question, do you think the government is heading in the right direction or seriously in the wrong direction? But speaking first to the survey results about where the political parties would sort of end up, it said that the National-led government would have 63 seats. The Labour-led parliamentary opposition would win about 50 seats. So that means each of them would have 5 fewer seats than what they have now. Support for New Zealand First and ACT each dropped 0.5%, putting them at 11% and 10% respectively. And the Greens increased 1.5% to 12.5%. Interestingly, it also had Opportunity polling at 6%. Now, this is huge for Opportunity because obviously we've got the 5% threshold. If you don't hit that, you're not getting into Parliament. And I think this is probably the first poll where Opportunity has polled above 5%. So, yeah, I think this is really interesting to see whether it's going to be a one-off. I think the important thing to take with polls is that it shows trends. So to see what happens with future polls, especially different polling companies, it will be quite interesting to see whether it is a trend that Opportunity is on the up and might actually make an appearance in Parliament later this year.
Yeah, I think that's really encouraging for Opportunity. I will just caution that the Roy Morgan poll is kind of one of the more unreliable polls we get in New Zealand. And so you probably might hear people talking about this, this poll's not that reliable, we'll ignore it. And Roy Morgan is one of those that is traditionally quite unreliable. I think the changes for National and Labour, one changed 7% and one changed about 5%. So those are massive changes, and you're not really seeing that in the One News poll. The other kind of polls that become public, you get Curia, which is David Farrer's company, and then you've also got Talbot Mills, who do the polling for the Labour Party. So I think it's kind of a bit of a take with a grain of salt. But what I do think is really encouraging is that I think Opportunity need to start having some polls over 5% to help the wasted vote mentality, which basically is that when people ultimately go to vote, they go, well, I vote for Opportunity, they're going to probably get less than 5%, my vote counts for nothing, so I'm not going to bother. I think it's a really positive trend for them. And I think as well, it's nice to see the polling party improving, because I think they came out at a 3.3 result earlier this year on the TV poll. So this is the highest result ever, and clearly something's going well, right? Because, they've never polled that high before in that poll before. So really excited to see that. But as I said, I'm cautioned that that's probably where they're actually at. I'd say probably they're more likely to be at 3.5%, 4%. But no, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Curia, because that's one that I take with a grain of salt, because Curia's resigned from the sort of Regulatory Research Association, New Zealand, things that sort of, I guess, puts in the regulations for these sorts of polls. And it's, I don't know how I feel about Curia. I don't know how I feel about polls in general, to be fair. It was interesting when we spoke to Wayne Eagleson earlier this year, and he said that, for prime ministers and for parties, these polls do have an impact, I guess, for them, and definitely for the public as well. Like, you see the headline of this is where we're at, and people, I guess, I would like to think, I will assume to think that people make up their minds a lot based on the numbers that they see in these polls, but they might not accurately reflect what is happening and what is going on. Again, I think it's more about the trends than it is the individual poll. And
polling, this is a bit nerdy, but polling methodology has had to change because it used to be done a lot on landlines. So polling has, and then there was a kind of period they were using landlines that weren't getting a lot of people picking up. And judging it as a scientific poll, so they will poll whatever percentage of the population is women, they'll poll that many percentage of women and male and different ethnicities and all that sort of stuff. So they do try and do them scientifically, but I think the methodology has had to change a bit because people no longer have landlines.
Yeah.
So I still think, as I said, I think they show trends. And politicians, whether they say it or not, absolutely watch the polls. They like to see what's going on, and they will be watching the trend, 100%.
Yeah, it's funny speaking to sort of like demographics and things and breaking it down like that, because Roy Morgan also breaks it down for the responses for the party vote by gender and age. And I'll say that the age categories I thought were really broad. It's got sort of a bit more information of the breakdown of these votes for women, say for example, between the ages of 18 and 49.
Yeah.
And then 50 plus.
Yeah. I think the way some of the other ones do them is to do it maybe like 18 to 39, but it's still, the age brackets are still massive.
It's huge.
It's still like, they're not breaking them down like 18 to 25, 25 to 40, like they're still, age brackets are still massive.
Because I would think it quite reasonable that might have a different feel, approach, opinion on politics than somebody who's 48.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think they're never quite perfect, but I think that it's still, politicians also do a lot of their own internal polling, so National, Labour, Greens, and if they've got enough money, they'll be doing their own internal polling, and the closer they get to the election, they will do a lot of polling. The other thing that political parties do is called focus groups, which is something you may or not have heard of. Essentially, they get a representative group of people, small number of people, and they sort of just put ideas to them and sort of see what their reactions are, chat to them about what they care about. And it was really funny. I remember talking to someone last election about a focus group, and they were saying that someone in the focus group at this point, it was like quite close to the election, had only just worked out that both the potential prime ministers were called Chris.
Oh.
So what I thought that was interesting though, it's a good reminder that there's so much stuff that is relatively the phrase beltway, meaning it's very sort of just happens in the political sphere, and everyday people aren't that bothered by it.
Yeah.
Which, on that note, if there is anything we talk about that you're like, what does this mean, or that was really awful, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear sort of what sort of stuff you want to hear more of, and what you want to have explained more, and that sort of stuff.
100% feedback is always welcome. Constructive criticism always welcome too. I guess sort of finishing off with this polls chat. I thought what was also quite interesting was the other question that it asked, which was about government confidence rating. I'm not going to try and describe how they do it because even to me it's quite confusing, but basically they ask the percentage of Kiwis, break it down. They ask them, is the country heading in the right direction or is the country seriously heading in the wrong direction? And what was interesting I found from these results from this Roy Morgan poll was that it jumped up for men, that they found much more so that the government was heading in the right direction, whereas for women, and especially for younger women in that, again, broad age group, it was like half of what men tend to think. They think more so that the country is heading in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit representative of the problem that the government got with women. I think, they are struggling to keep women voters happy. And I think I was talking to someone about this recently and it kind of made sense to me. I mean, there are a lot of women, if you think about our roles and whether or not we want them to be or not, but we are sort of the ones who carry a lot of the, burden around the house. And so we're the ones who are buying the food. So we're seeing how much food prices are going up. We're often, we've been driving around, taking kids to and from school, so they'll see how much petrol they're paying at the pump. Doing the household bills, so seeing how much the interest rates on their mortgage are. Mm-hmm. And I thought when you look at it like that, I was like, that kind of makes sense, right? Because things are still really expensive. The cost of living hasn't got a lot better due to a lot of things outside of the government's control. Mm-hmm. But I do still think that women are not seeing any sort of relief or anything getting better in their lives, so I think they are struggling with how things are going. So I'm not surprised there. And I think also that right track, wrong track poll is something that the governments will always care a lot about because that really sort of, in terms of showing trajectory and direction, that really shows how people are feeling as opposed to just being like, would you vote for National or would you vote for Labour?
Yeah. It's a real interesting one. I think it's a maybe a question, be quite interested to hear from viewers. Do you think the country's heading in the right direction or in the wrong direction?
Definitely keen to hear about that, you know, like how do you think this government's performing? And I guess also is like, do you see hope in the opposition parties as well? Because I think that's what's really tough is I do sometimes think like, particularly if you look outside New Zealand, if you look somewhere like America, it's just like bad options all around, you know?
Oh
like,
my God,
like,
yeah.
I kind of just think like, I don't even know like who I would have voted for in the last couple of American elections, probably, you know, last 3 or 4, like, it's been so hard. So I think, yeah, I guess so firstly, do our listeners think the country's on the right or the wrong track? And secondly, are you inspired or are you feeling hopeful by what, you know, the opposition's offering you?
It's so funny you mentioned that because I was having a discussion with my partner today. Disclaimer, he's a male. So, yeah, I take with a grain of salt. But he was quite vocal in that he doesn't feel like the opposition parties are inspiring much hope. And more so, it feels like they're sort of evoking more rage than hope. And I think that's something that we're seeing internationally. I heard a clip of Nigel Farage, for example, saying that the recent death of a man who was stabbed in the police, it was a whole thing. Very poor explanation, my bad. But he was saying, you know, people need to be outraged about this. People need to be enraged and completely go feral, essentially, about this issue. And I don't actually think that that's the constructive way and to deal with the issues that we're facing as a society, as a community, as a country.
But it's the whole politics of grievance thing, right?
Yeah.
Like people are just voting based on their grievances. They're not sort of thinking about hope. But I'm kind of waiting for the next chapter in the political cycle where people are just ready for hope and ready for something new. But I feel like we've seen hardly anything from Greens to Pāti Māori, not much from Labour either. Like I thought their responses to the budget were pretty weak. You know, they didn't really have a lot prepared. We kind of knew it was coming in that budget, and it's sort of like, okay, so when are you going to announce any policy? I think the Greens have really lost their way this term. I think they've really struggled. You know, we haven't seen, they kind of, I think, got quite, and fair enough, but quite tied up in the Palestine stuff. And I think since losing James Shaw, they haven't kept themselves focused on the environment track. And, you know, there are a lot of people that have voted for them because of their environmental credentials. And while the Palestine stuff's really, really important, it's also not something that's going to help everyday New Zealanders' cost of living pressures get better or deal with the sort of issues that, you know, we don't face in our lives. And I said, not take away from that horrific situation that's been going on overseas, but it's getting a balance right. And I kind of think that they haven't really struck a balance. And it's like, okay, well, what are you going to do for New Zealand? What are you going to do to create hope?
Yeah, I think that is a fair criticism. I think it is actually something that I have probably been feeling a little bit too, even as a quite vocal sort of Green supporter. I do, I guess, consume a bit more directly some of their responses as an opposition party, and I am very much in favour, particularly of our MPs like Chloe Swarbrick, Francisco Hernandez, Lawrence Zunan, Lan Pham. I think those Green MPs have done a really wonderful job of holding the government to account in some places. Tamitha Paul, for example, her mahi with the stalking laws and really good sort of constructive debate and things to make laws better.
Yeah, but then I think there's been distractions though, right? Because Tamitha Paul's like all stuff around police and comments that are coming out on that. It's like everyday New Zealanders don't want to hear that you want to get rid of the police, you know? Like I just think there's been sort of distractions.
Yeah, distractions, but I wonder like who's stoking that sort of distraction. Like I think it kind of goes two ways. The Greens might feel like they need to respond to some issues because it's being stoked up as an issue when maybe like some things like definitions of a man and woman, we will get to that in a later episode, has become an issue where it actually doesn't need to be an issue, you know? So there is that sort of reactionary response that does need to be made, and it does get in the way of being able to present a really strong case as to why they are better in Parliament. And I think they are better to be in government because of those responses. To me, that aligns with what I would like to see our government in the future do and enact. But yeah, I can agree to an extent that I would like to see some more hope from our politicians in this campaign towards the election.
I really need to see, but I would love to, and I'm sure no one's going to do it, but I'd do a trial run and just see if there was a party that was just positive, ignored all the sort of noise, And again, like, I understand politics well enough to know this would be naive to think that could be done, but it'd be really interesting to do a bit of a study around if there's a party that's just, speaks hopefully and, positively, which maybe Opportunity Party are going to do a little bit, which probably leads nicely to our next point that we are really excited to share with you next week, our interview with Kule Wong, the Opportunity Party leader. We were fortunate enough to be welcomed into her home, and it was lovely. I thought that she was so personable, and we just went into her home. She had her, like, where her children live, and she had sort of children's toys in the corner, and we sat on her couch and had a conversation.
Yeah.
And I think she's very realistic, probably a little bit more than previous Opportunity Parties have been. So I'm really excited for you guys to hear the chat and interested to hear what you think, and if she's someone that you might consider voting for a bit of change and a bit of hope.
Yes, definitely interesting. Was a real down-to-earth conversation, I thought. So we're super excited to put that out next Sunday. So yeah, keep an eye out for that.
Alex, to wrap up, we'll do social media moment of the week.
Yes.
And Alex has got a nomination this week, so I'll let her share.
Oh my God. Okay. Social media moment of the week goes to National MP for Southland, Joseph Mooney. He's been awarded this honour, for his exhausting amount of tweets. Do we still call them tweets? I don't know.
I assume so.
I assume so, on X, formerly known as Twitter. I guess a little bit of background, right? I used to be so big on Twitter back in the day. As a, I don't want to say former, I'll hold on to it, current forever One Direction girl, I found a real community on Twitter with these like preteens who were obsessed with One Direction. So I loved going on
I
to
just
Twitter.
learned something new about you.
Oh my God.
That whole story I hadn't about it, so that's awesome.
Well, here we go. Opening up conversations. No, seriously, it was huge. And definitely since the Elon Muskification of Twitter, now X, I seldom go onto that platform at all. But Joseph Mooney hasn't dropped off one bit. In fact, last month alone, in May, he wrote 629 posts on X. That's 20 posts a day.
Where does he find the time? His electorate is massive. Southland's one of the biggest seats in the country.
Yeah.
What is he doing?
It's crazy. And so his content is kind of all over the place. And I'll highlight one post in particular. But he's been on my mind for a little bit. And so I was actually quite glad, I think, to see that Henry Cook, again from the Post, had done an article about him, because it is quite bizarre. But one post I wanted to highlight was one on 27 May, which reads, Chloe Swarbrick is wasting the House's time right now questioning the PM about the drafting of the Smith v Fonterra bill and the reasons for doing so. If she just followed my X feed, she wouldn't have to waste everyone's time. Bracket, I did tell her that before question time. Close bracket.
Right.
Yeah, total wild one for me. I'm not entirely sure whether we should be taking a Member of Parliament's X feed in lieu of like asking or challenging the Prime Minister in the House.
100%. And also, there's so many people in New Zealand that are actually even on X/Twitter, whatever you want to call it. Like,
well, that's been a big thing because the courts of New Zealand have said we're not going to be posting on X anymore. And a lot of people who tend to be, I guess, right of centre have kind of thrown their arms up and be like, why are you not posting on X anymore? I mean, let's call it for what it is. It's a bit of a shithole these days. Like, it's a lot of very weird and nasty commentary on Twitter. Oh, X, sorry. Whatever. But
yeah,
still some good things. I know there are some good things, I guess, still going on in that platform, but I don't know.
that is crazy. I would love to know his mentality behind that. And also, I wonder if he's using AI to help him post on it. Like,
Yeah, Grok.
Has he got something set up to just sort of automatically post things? Because MPs are busy people. They work, like I will 100% vouch for most of them, or the good ones, work 80 to 100-hour weeks.
Yeah.
Every week. So where does he find the time to put that many posts up?
And like,
and the content to use as well.
No, exactly. Like, I'm sure that content and that post that I just referred to was in jest. So, I don't want to be too overcritical and, let's have some fun. But I just think it's such a bizarre thing to say. And it just does open up that sort of conversation or thought process for me of how much do we take from politicians, what they post on social media, as opposed to the actual proper format in which we are used to hearing them from in Parliament, in the House, or when they make official sort of press releases and statements and things.
Yeah. Yeah, very random. Well, that's a pretty good nomination.
Thank you. I'm proud of that one. I've been stewing on it for a while. Well, the entire month of May, I guess. So, yeah, congratulations, question mark, Joseph Mooney. You are this week's recipient of Social Media Moment of the Week.
Well, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for listening, and we will look forward to being back with you soon.
Yes, tune in next week with our chat with Kule Wong.